So mostly I wanted to mention again our generous sponsors, in particular Microsoft, that is usually generous, and this year as well, and Google, who outdid their usual contribution this year, for a reason I have yet to understand.
Is it secret, or can you be more specific on what that exactly means?
Yeah, so Microsoft gives us basically $10K every year. Google usually gives us $2K, and this year they chose to give $3K. So those are the figures. And this is the plan for this meeting. So as I mentioned yesterday, the business meeting this time is split into two. We had the reports and awards yesterday, and today it's the discussion part, and there are four concrete things I want to discuss today. One of them we actually have to vote on. And then if anyone else has any other business, we can deal with that as well. So the first, I'll just go over all the items and then we'll start. So the first issue is the TCS Insularity Task Force, which Jelani will introduce. And if anyone has to say anything about it, we can discuss it a little bit. Then we have some matters to discuss regarding FOCS 2021 that Alexandra will introduce, and we will that will require some discussion to see what the attitudes are. Then we have to vote on the location of FOCS 2022. There's one bid, so we'll vote on it. And finally, we have to discuss all sorts of issues regarding submissions policies. So actually, these are two separate issues, but they're related, and that's why I merged them. Samir might not be able to show up because he's also department chair and has to deal with stuff right now. If he doesn't show up, I will introduce that. So that's the agenda, and let's start with Jelani. Let me just stop my share. Is Jelani here? Yeah, he's here. Hi, Jelani. You need to.
Can you hear me? I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, great. So yes, as you've all mentioned, there's this new TCS Insularity Task Force. So I'm on CATCS, on the CATCS committee, and many of us have heard concerns from many members of the TCS community that our publishing culture is not welcoming of new directions, and as a result, our field is becoming too insular and inward looking. So we created a task force to investigate this and get feedback from all of you, from the TCS community. And that's what this is about. So there's a survey that I've made, that we've made. The link is at the bottom. And this is the set of members of the task force. Okay.
Can we share it on the chat, on chat?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that as well. For some reason in the Linux version of Zoom, I can't chat while also sharing screen. So I'll have to do that after I get out of the share screen. Okay. Questions?
Remarks or questions or anything?
And so provide some context. This is the first time hearing about it, so you know, I guess I'll take the survey, but maybe you can say a little bit more of the deliberations and so on.
Sure. So what are the kinds of things we've been hearing? You know, certain sub areas of TCS feel like they don't have adequate representation at the flagship conferences like FOCS and Stock. they feel that, say, for example, one sub area we've heard from a lot, it's not the only one, is, say, ML theory. They feel that the representation on PCs is minimal. Also, the kinds of questions that, the kinds of papers that get accepted from the area, it's the PCs tend to favor not take risks, let's say. So if you solve a very technical problem, then that's appreciated. But in ML theory, they feel like a lot of the interesting stuff is in the modeling and the less technical stuff. And this is not just one person who's been telling us this. This is quite a large number of people actually who have been reaching out and making these kinds of comments. So again, it's part of the reason that we're doing this is to get feedback from kind of what the broader community is thinking, and not just the people who have reached out to us.
So one just general comment. I think the general idea of making sure that we're broad is really good. I think there's a PR issue with the title, sort of particularly outside the field, if people sort of think about it. So I think it would be better just in terms of how it's described to think about it in a positive way, rather to describe it in a positive way, rather than in the negative way. And I worry about the using that term insularity. I understand that's I understand about concern, but I just think it's a PR error to choose that as the title of the task force. And
I think that makes sense.
Because I think it should be renamed for
TCS
yeah.
or something like that, if that's not good.
Yeah, so something about
Outreach, something like that. TCS.
Broadening
Broadening?
TCS.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's true. I actually remember, so this this is now quite a few years ago. Certainly the question of ML theory was has something that came up certainly in discussions when I was SIGAC chair, and about because there are different models of ML theory and a lot of what kind of research is appropriate. Clearly, things like conferences like CULT came out of the StockFox community and Balanced paper and so on. But that's just, and there's also the optimization side, which again, but that's just part of what's going on now. CULT is sort of not the CULT that it was necessarily 20 years ago, but there is a broader sense of it, and I know that there's been an effort over time to sort of broaden the perspective, but in a larger committee, part of it depends on what's already being submitted. So there's always a chicken and egg. So we've had this with other communities like computational geometry. Relatively few papers are submitted. So relatively few papers are, you choose the PC members to sort of match the expected papers you get. And so there's really a chicken and egg thing that I think is important to understand in how we deal with these issues. I agree that there are issues. In some sense, so I think there are good things to do. I haven't obviously taken the survey, but anyway, so that's.
So there are a few suggestions for an alternative name. Salil is suggesting the TCS Intellectual Openness Committee. Shuchi suggested TCS Non-Insularity.
Just kidding.
Yeah. And Till suggested TCS broadening. And he stole it from Sandy, so.
I think she just said it, right? Did you just said it?
Sure, go ahead. So,
Wait.
yeah, anyone else has anything to say about this? I want to mention that even though indeed a lot of the discussion about or a lot of the complaints about this issue come from theoreticians who do work in related to machine learning. There are other communities that are sort of sliding away from the theory, sort of the general theory community, and two other communities that I've noticed don't have massive showing, let's say at FOCS and Stock, are the crypto community and the computational game theory community. So there is a somewhat broader issue here than just focusing on machine learning. I don't think we want to lose communities that are, at least if we want to keep conferences like FOCS and Stock as a place where the whole of theory gathers and learns from each other, we need to make sure that substantial chunks of the theory community aren't sliding away from us.
I just want to kind of second what Paul said. This isn't at all a new problem. I mean, we used to have the PL theory community used to be, logic community used to be part of FOCS and Stock. I mean, it's been a battle. I mean, basically all the spin-off conferences, COLT, even the complexity conference, most of these conferences come out because people don't feel that they're getting enough of their papers accepted into Stock and FOCS, so they go and create their own conference. In fact, even on a novelty issue, that's how this what's this the conference, the new
ITCS.
ITCS, thanks.
Yeah.
The ITCS conference came out because people didn't think there was enough novelty in Stock and FOCS. I mean, Stock and FOCS, it's been growing, but it can only grow so much. Or maybe it can't. I mean, that's the other option, is to really grow Stock and FOCS.
That's one of the questions on the survey, by the way.
For every community, but that's the kind of choice you have to make. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to represent every community, and communities are going to feel like they need to spin off, and it's almost a natural progression.
I think there's a difference, Lance, between what happened with previous conferences and COLT, for instance. There is a significant overlap between the researchers who publish in COLT and also in Stock and FOCS. And I think at this point, the choice is not clear anymore. So if I have a paper and I have the option to submit it to Stock FOCS or COLT, given the prior that Stock FOCS is not quite receptive to the kind of work, it's not about the quality, it's about the receptiveness.
Yeah.
I would maybe prefer to submit it to COLT. And as a consequence, COLT is really taking over a large part of this modern algorithmic theory. And I guess maybe one reason is that we, in our conferences, do not emphasize so much modeling. It's all about methods, when we have a well-defined problem, the focus is on improving the exponent or the constant or something like that. Whereas these conferences are more open to modeling. And you mentioned ITCS. So my question to Jelani would be, where would the boundary be between, let's say, a broadened version of Stock FOCS and from what I see, a narrowing version of ITCS? I'm not sure ITCS actually succeeded in its goals, to be very honest. I mean, because at the end, we may create a very nice charter, but it's the implementation that takes over, and the implementation is still being done by the same people. So I think there is a question about where the boundary would be between these two conferences.
Salil, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just a few thoughts. So first, I hope this survey is advertised more widely, meaning that I think the motivation was to hear broadly from the community, and the people who show up at a business meeting is not necessarily a representative sample of the meeting. So figuring out how to get input widely would be good. I also agree with Paul's comment about a positive framing of the goal. I mean, from my vantage point, I see lots of people from our community and from the core of our community going out and working in areas that cross over with other fields and attending conferences that are, adjacent to or even 2 steps away from Stock FOCS. And I think that's actually a really positive thing, as long as we don't lose them from our community. But it feels like the framing, at least from skimming the conversation so far and skimming the survey, is a lot about this kind of age-old question of how many papers and how we accept papers to the conference. And I think we should. I see there are some suggestions actually in the survey that are actually the sort of thing that I see that the Theory Fest was meant to accomplish. And so it seems like our community is trying to do some things along these lines, and having a sense of whether those are serving their purpose. Maybe ITCS didn't succeed, but how about the Theory Fest, which has gone on for a few years? And if that's not working, then maybe we should try to understand why that's not achieving the desired goals as well, rather than proposing kind of separately something new that to try in addition to what we're doing before.
Thanks, Salil. There was something on my mind that I don't quite remember right now, but Till has a remark, so I'll read it aloud. ESA has a lot of satellite conferences happening at the same time location, similar with Sausage. Maybe this is also an option for FOCS. So I want to say something about this. So this year we tried this on a small scale. TCC was supposed to be co-located with FOCS, except that we don't have a physical conference, so the co-location is meaningless. Just the 2 conferences are running in parallel right now.
Which is sort of the worst of all possible worlds, because now you can't participate. It was very difficult to participate in both. So in some sense, it failed, it was a negative of having that plan.
But we didn't anticipate the current situation, so.
Of course. No, I'm just saying we should, we shouldn't count this as, it was an attempt, but we shouldn't count this as even having been remotely, tried as an option in some real sense. Like we should try it again.
Yeah. So I mentioned yesterday that I'm looking for additional opportunities like this one. TCC is not an opportunity we can take every year, because I think it, in terms of location, it doesn't behave the same way as FOCS. So I'm looking for other opportunities, and for FOCS specifically, it's not that easy because of the timing of FOCS. Most conferences tend to be in summer. Okay, so Salil mentioned advertising, so we are hoping that people will blog on at least on the survey. Lance asked if he can blog on it. Of course you can.
But under another name, please.
Yeah, okay, so we'll come up with a better name, perhaps, or Jelani will come up with a better name.
I had a
Jelani,
few,
yeah, Shankwa?
right. So I just like to add very few things that, for example, in soda, it has a perennial alignment with several symposiums. And those few symposiums are, to some degree, thematically aligned with soda, right? So for example, making algorithms simple. So they had the principle of the conference called SOSA, just, try to emphasize this, the value of simplicity of algorithm, right? And I think recently a conference basically combined parallel computing and more algorithmic issue is trying out with soda. So in some sense that probably this longer term, more permanent alignment required is a thematic cohesion, right? So it broadened the scope of a conference, but meanwhile, somehow they feel much more aligned. So for example, I'm from the generation like Lance, from those generation that we grew up, completely hardened, community members of StockFox. And, but I remember that, for example, somewhere in the 90s, the computational geometry, because it essentially as a block, feels thematically they are somehow deviated from StockFox. I still remember one of my vivid fight with Herbert. I had a paper with him, eventually, a beautiful paper, he went to JACM, and he was ardent that he didn't want to go to Stock. Right, so because he said that my community now is computational geometry. I want to present this work, which are mass generation and the logic calculation, not to Stock audience, but to, so it's more about audience rather than whether this paper can be accepted or not, right? So I think to this degree, maybe certain satellite alignment is, if one can find a more coherent theme that allow branch to continue to hook on to FOCS, maybe that will give us much more life, right?
There are a few more comments. Jelani, do you want to have a look at them instead of me reading all of them?
Sure, I'm taking a look. So one comment by Till is to maybe help transparency, could FOCS publish statistics on how many papers get published from different fields and also the number of submissions from different fields? And I think, in previous years' business meetings, I've seen these numbers usually presented. So they're there somewhere, right? So the question is whether they can be put together in a single spreadsheet.
It's often part of the chair's report. I didn't include it this year just because it wasn't easy to extract from our review software. And I didn't want to go through all 400 and categorize them by hand. So, but David Zuckerman, for example, had a slide on that last year. So
I think it's actually a, so I don't know that transparency is necessarily a help, because they can, you actually get, for example, in some of the areas, in an area where you've got 2 or 3 papers submitted, like one that might be categorized as logic, one year you might get 2 accepted, another year you might get 0. And this is not going to encourage lots of people to go submit. So it's not going to allow us to reverse issues where there are groups that are nearby where they've already left and are not submitting that we want to make sure will join. I think it will reinforce trends, and occasionally you get, I know, for example, in some of the areas where people saw a low number, and that was an impetus to actually, got a sense of a low number, and that was an impetus to leave. So I don't know that these things are necessarily helpful.
So I specifically suggested this because, so I'm usually going to computational geometry, and there people said, oh, FOCS and Stock, you can't get any computational geometry paper. But now when I looked at the accepted papers, I thought there were a lot of computational geometry papers. So I think that would actually be a strong argument. And if there's just 1 or 2 papers from a specific area, then maybe it would be good to know, right?
Tzlil raised her hand, so.
I mean, I don't know.
We can't hear
Your
you.
volume is very low.
Can you hear me now?
It's better, but it's still, the volume is still pretty low.
Maybe you can get closer to the mic. Now you're muted, actually.
What
Oh,
about now? Is it better? I'm really close to the mic.
oh, okay. Now it's better.
Okay, so I guess that these suggestions to co-locate with other conferences are not the same as saying that we're going to include papers from the area in the FOCS or STOCK program. I think for people, if they feel like the papers aren't part of the program, it's like not, I mean, it's a stronger signal of belonging and cohesion would be to say that all of the papers should belong in the same program, if that makes sense. I think also for younger researchers, maybe the signal of having your papers accepted or rejected to a particular venue is a little bit stronger than like what you see in the program, if that makes sense.
I guess I can clarify the one I made. When I say Sausage did workshops, I don't mean we have an extra separate day a weekend before. We have sausage in the mornings and workshops in the afternoons to deliberately incorporate those as part of the main program, sort of like what SOTA does with the workshops reappearing. I think that can be a really good way to get overlapping communities to have a dedicated, but we don't even always do publications. Sometimes it's just invited speakers on a topic that seems interesting to the whole community. But tacking on an extra pre-workshop day usually doesn't generate a lot of attendance for the 4 days. We've kind of interleaved it to force people to come and stay and go to talks and contribute to the community. It's been fairly successful.
Good. So unless there's any other comments, I suggest we move on. And I guess, Jelani, do you want to conclude this discussion? We will have to involve the community further, right, in the whole process.
Right. So I think that this feedback was useful. I'll send it back to the rest of the committee. I think it makes sense also, as people suggested, to, like as Paul suggested, to change the name. So there were several suggestions for new names in the chat, and I'll send them to the committee and see if we can also come up with other names as well. But yeah, we'll do that soon so that we can get a link out on blogs.
Great. So the next order of business has to do with FOCS 2021 that is supposed to happen in Denver next year. Alexandra, so we already voted on it last year, and
Right.
the conference is already in the works, but there are some issues regarding the current situation. So Alexandra will explain a bit.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the issues are self-explanatory. We are feeling that holding a physical conference, I guess in November of 2021, might not be feasible yet. And there are a few things that we talked about. One was that we could do a hybrid model where whoever wants to attend in person could, and the rest would attend online, which has challenges as well, in the sense that we will not be able to get a good idea on how many people will attend when we're booking, the venues and so on and so forth. It will be a big difference if it's 10% that are comfortable traveling, or 80% of the people. One suggestion that we discussed was to keep the deadlines the same, but postpone the physical conference till spring 2022. So we would still hold a conference in March, say, or January, or whatever, you know, to be decided. 2022, still in Denver. And, you know, for the people that actually like to ski, that would be a better choice because the resorts are in full swing, you know, between January and March anyway. So November wouldn't be a good time for that. And, you know, the other option, of course, is to go completely online, like FOCS 2020. Ski resorts are opening something like November 30th, November 25th, depending, and they close mid-April. So March is a really good month. You know, last year, April 30th, I had really good winter powder, for example. Well, I mean, in the backcountry because the resorts were closed, but April 30th was a great powder day, for example, in the Boulder area. So yeah, in terms of skiing, this is much better. However, in terms of
I think I just have to interlude. I think Nishitan, you have to chair this part of the business meeting because I've become extremely biased.
Because of ski season?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to take people skiing, you know, in my backyard or whatever, you know, because I ski there a lot. Well, I snowboard, but it doesn't really make a difference, I guess. But yeah, so I think what the consensus was yesterday when Nishith, Yuval, and I talked on the phone was to perhaps try to postpone till the spring, because we actually felt that at least ourselves, but mostly other people also are getting a little tired of holding everything online. So if we have the chance to do it in person, that might be nicer, irrespective of skiing, you know, like in any case. I don't think I have much else to add to that.
I mean, I think that's somehow the skiing should not be the main reason to decide.
Sure.
You know, the papers are written well ahead of time. You know, by the time the conference happens, I think if it is so much late in spring, I think everybody will know about the papers, and there'll be very little incentive for most people to travel other than those who want to ski and use it as an excuse. I think we should make this decision on other grounds than skiing. That's my opinion.
So
I mean, we're not yet.
Sorry, I put the ski season in the chat. It was just a random question. I'm not even a skier myself. So I actually think that if we are in a position to hold an in-person conference, there will be just a huge pent-up interest in getting together and sort of getting to a feeling of normalcy if we can. So I do think there's an advantage of being able to do things. There are lots of conferences that, you know, they're conferences like, I don't know, is it BLTB, whatever, who do accept papers over a whole year. And it's, you know, it could be 11 months between the time your paper was accepted and the time it shows up at the conference. So I'm personally am hopeful that November will be good even by then, but you know, maybe not. And I would be pretty open to picking another time, provided we can do it at a time of year that's not going to cause other issues. So we have SOTA in January, so people will be traveling then. It's always already that term. But March is sort of one of these particularly tough times with many places. They're in the throes of interview season. We have end of term. I mean, there are a lot of things going on, sort of in the mid, you know, I'm just wondering about what is, if we're going to move it, what's really the best time. And we don't want it to be, you know, bleeding into the, you know, spring and summer, yeah. You know, late enough towards stock. So what would be the good time?
So can I make one comment? Sorry. So I mean, I think that one thing I don't think it's a good idea is to have like this hybrid model, because I feel that it's gonna complicate things for the organizer and gonna make it sort of weird for people sometimes. I mean, I think either doing it like, fully online or fully, in person. Both I think are great options and we could discuss, but this hybrid model I think is just gonna be complicated.
Yeah, I agree. I think the hybrid model will involve basically doing 2 times the work almost.
There's also a financial aspect to it. If it's a hybrid model, it will be very hard to predict how many people will show up, and there will definitely be a difference in registration fees, and we need a minimum number of people to make the conference viable.
Mm-hmm.
If it's physical, in the virtual world, it's pretty easy to make it viable.
And the technology.
So let me add one thing. So clearly many conferences are facing similar problem. SODA is handling this as following. For example, initially we supposed to have conference in DC this year. Of course, it's become virtual. It's just impossible to do physically. What essentially we were able to do is do a time parameterization, namely we negotiated with the DC area, saying that when it's feasible, we will return to DC. So which means our currently aligned our next year, again with the DC, we push every alignment backward by 1 year. So this way, a lot of the arrangement and also financial things are much easier to negotiate with the hotel, because for example, we negotiate with them, we just move the contract to next year. And it's become much cleaner, easily just for them to accept it, because they knew we're coming back next year, but this is because of the situation. So I don't know whether if one began to, otherwise, for example, Alexandra spent a lot of time to try to get it arranged in Colorado, and if it didn't happen, then we move on. It's really, it's a lot of work has been done, right? So, and also financially, in which way we can negotiate with hotel become very limited. I don't know whether one can somehow put a conditional, but this needs our community to agree. If next year's virtual in large, then the next conference will happen in Colorado area.
So I want to make a case for the hybrid model. A lot of people are saying, hybrid would be the worst of both worlds. And I think the right comparison to make is to ask, is to observe that in-person attendees would get the same experience as every normal year, and online attendees would get something better than not attending the conference at all. So if you look at it that way, the hybrid model allows more people to be able to participate. And surely there are logistical challenges. Maybe there's some way to figure out how many rooms to reserve part of it, but otherwise, is it really much harder than doing a completely virtual conference?
So a couple of comments. So there are considerable expenses in converting sort of presentations that work in a live setting to ones that work live virtually. So, I mean, it is more expense of actually the filming. So you need somebody who's an operator more or less in each of the rooms in which you have presentations. The expenses are definitely greater. So that's an issue. I mean, actually there are some advantages to the virtual side, that we actually do get real questions in a way that we don't always get in-person conferences. So that's been one plus I've observed. The other comment I want to make is related to Shanghua's comment, and it works for SODA to have this, delay a year, because you basically have SIAM staff who are running the conference. The conferences that we've had, the stock conference in organized at Northwestern, this conference at Duke, even though it's not in person, the amount, the organizers couldn't have guessed that they would be doing all this work for a virtual conference that wouldn't bring people to Chapel Hill or to Durham or to the Chicago area. So I don't think that works for us, unfortunately, because we don't have a fixed staff that's ready to do it. Because it's a phenomenal amount of work, and it's no less work if it's virtual.
That's true.
So I just want to add one more point of view here. I mean, thinking from the point of view of international attendees, and I think that's, or people who need to come from somewhere, I mean, outside of US, they would probably need to know a little bit more in advance whether we are, and the situation might not clear up by April, May, or June. And so one thing that we were considering is to take a call sometime late summer, whether we do it fully virtual or delay it. It's not, I mean, so we could still go back to this decision as late as possible for everybody to be either able to make it or be virtual. I think at this point, the problem is at this point, we don't know whether a physical conference is possible, and if so, what percentage of people would actually attend to agree to come, given that the circumstances may not be particularly great till March or April.
I mean, and the other minor point, sorry, Yuval.
Yeah, I wanted to add one more aspect to this. So in general, ignoring completely what happened in the last 10 months or so, I would have loved to move FOCS to December or January anyway. And the only thing blocking me from doing this is SOTA, of course. So if our relations with SOTA could be somehow revised, I think it would have been better for FOCS to be permanently held in December or January. So in terms of having an excuse to move FOCS, let's say to January, maybe not to March, but to January, I personally like the idea. And the reason, by the way, that I think it's a good idea is because stock moved from sometime in May to late June. So the gap between FOCS and stock now is smaller than it should be. I mean, from stock to FOCS, not the other way around. And Shankwa is smiling because he's also the chair of the steering committee of SOTA and has other concerns in mind.
I have no other motive, just for the good of the entire theoretical computer science.
No, but obviously there is an issue with SOTA, right? I mean, we have to accommodate.
I mean, we have ITCS also at the same time, roughly.
ITCS is in February and
no, late January usually.
Oh, okay.
I mean, some years it's been very close to SOTA.
Yeah, the one thing that goes on at ITCS that I've always thought would be kind of an interesting aspect related to FOCS is there's this graduating PhD segment where students do presentations. It's been a very effective piece there, and it's one I had wondered whether we could include at FOCS at some point.
We did that last year. We had the poster.
Oh, that's right.
The job market poster sessions. We didn't do it this year because of the virtual platform. There were so many things going on with the issues with virtual conference that I thought this would be too much. But next year we will, I mean, if next year the conference is physical, we will definitely resume this new tradition.
So, I mean, I also feel like in terms of in-person versus online, like if everything was to go online, I mean, why don't we just submit things to journals and our whole field, just becomes like math, like most of the fields submit things to journals, and the reason they go to conferences is to communicate with other researchers in person. So I feel like the point of conferences existing is the in-person component of it. Otherwise, in terms of research, we don't have to have deadlines. We could just have a paper, submit it wherever we want, and like wait for the acceptance, which is the most normal thing that I would imagine for any research area. So I'm really thinking like anything we change, I mean, okay, with modifications, I agree, but the whole point of a conference is to interact.
So,
I don't know.
So one thing is it possible to say, hey, in these like hotel contracts and things, yes, we'll do it for November, but there's an option to shift it like till February or something like that. So it wouldn't conflict with SODA, so that if it looks problematic in the summer, that there's like a one-time option to shift it like 2 months or 2 or 3 months.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't get that.
So the idea is, so a hotel contract, you've booked a weekend or whatever, and Shangwa was saying you could shift it a year. I don't think the shifting a year works, but if there were a way of putting in an option to say we blocked off this one, and we've got sort of a tentative spot, sort of in February or something, so it's not conflicting with SODA, ITCS, QIP, whatever, so that it could shift, but it would run everything except for the presentations and in-person get-together would be on exact same schedule, and then you could just have some sort of date by which you could say, hey, can we shift? I mean, it's just something maybe that hotel contract might go for.
Okay, so I mean, I just want to say it sucks to be the first person to have to organize this in the middle of the pandemic, with no prior on what to do.
We'll probably have to look into various options, right? I actually want to, this is not a vote, but I'd like to see some show of hands to see what the mood of the community is. If the circumstances are such that we're considering postponing FOCS by a month, by 2 months, by 3 months, let's say to February, or maybe even some reasonable time around that time. Do you think it's a good idea or a terrible idea in that case? So who's in favor of doing this if the circumstances are such that this is required? Or this, I guess it's hard to see the hands, right? Because some people
There is a survey option in Zoom, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay, so there's also, you can just raise your hands. Okay, good. Under reactions, you can do thumbs up or thumbs down. Great.
I only see thumbs up.
Yeah, are there any thumbs down, people?
Can you repeat?
Thumbs down is not an option. It's
So
only thumbs
there's
up.
a frown or
Oh.
a smiley, so maybe we can use
Can you repeat the
frown
question?
for.
Okay, so the question is, if we can't hold a physical conference in November, and we learn about it sufficiently early to be able to postpone FOCS, let's say to February for a concrete month. Do you regard this as a good thing or a bad thing? So a good thing would be thumbs up, and a bad thing would be this open mouth
Wait,
Wait, does it mean that authors of the papers will be forced to physically go in February to the conference? Is that what it means?
We're not going to force anyone if there's still a pandemic raging somewhere meaningful. So, you know, if the health situation is not an issue, then obviously we go back to normal and authors are expected to present their papers. But if there will be an issue of concern of safety, then we will let authors have the option to present the paper remotely.
I think the uncertainty will make it hard for authors to commit, right? You know, you submit a paper and then you say, oh, look, we're going to move it to February. Maybe, you know, one cannot, or for whatever reason, right?
We could also postpone the deadline as well. I mean, obviously the situation, we hope to clarify the situation as quickly as possible, but we live in uncertain times, and I guess we'll have to make a call at some point. So I think we'll try to make things as certain as possible, as early as possible.
So Yuval, the question of postponing the conference by 3 months is under the assumption that in November it will be impossible to hold it, but we somehow will know that by February we will be able to hold it. This seems like a low probability event to me.
No, you have to take into account the fact that we can't decide in November. We have to decide before November, and many months before November. So the question is this: when we have to make the decision on November, does it seem that November is going to be okay, or is it still uncertain? That's really the situation that we will face.
But you have to.
I think by November we will know if November is okay or not, and if it's not okay, then we probably won't know about February. But I suspect that by the end of 2021, things will be fine.
But there are uncertainties, right? I mean, the part that we can't know, right? I mean, the one thing that we know that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So right now we don't know, but I'm pretty sure that by November we'll know that February is okay.
Maybe yes and maybe no, but I'm saying, I think it's probably better to keep the conference and run this annual cycle as much as possible, and not hoping that it's going to be okay and somehow delaying it and then sort of having some other issues. I mean, I just prefer to, I think it's better to play it safe. And if we're not sure, just have another.
I think at time of deadline, people should know if they will be required to travel in February or in November. I don't think, because submitting a paper, you're committing to coming to a conference.
Yeah.
And
I don't see any foreseeable situation where you're going to be able to know for sure that you'll be able to have in-person people. Like you're going to have to just make it optional to attend, no matter what.
I think we want to increase the probability of.
Yeah, that's sort of obvious that maybe even in February we will have to make attendance optional.
Right.
But then I think you'll have very few people coming.
Why?
Maybe those who want to ski, but you know, if there is uncertainty, there won't. I mean, I'll talk about myself, right? You know, most people, I think many people won't go. Either they, you know,
I agree. I think people from outside the US will probably be less likely to come. People who are more senior maybe don't need as much networking will not come. So you'll get mostly junior people who won't have anybody else to network with because other people are not coming. So I think you're gonna be losing.
I'm a bit more optimistic. First of all, I believe that let's say by April, we will have a better. We might not have a better situation, but we will have a better perspective on what the situation is about to be by the end of the year. Because either these vaccines will start being distributed or they won't, right? If they're not, then the prospects are glim. If they are, then there will be some forecast on the, you know, on how long it will take for most people to have access to vaccines.
Worldwide, you mean?
Worldwide, yeah.
Yeah, I think in some parts of the world they're just not going to have access. You can't really guarantee it in this time frame.
I guess you can't guarantee that the whole world will have access, but if we, to be honest, if we look at the FOCS Talk community, it's mostly US, Europe, a little bit of Israel, a little bit of some countries in East Asia. So it's not all over the world that people are coming. I mean, it's when the conference is in North America, which is most of the time, the bulk of attendance is from North America. And then the second far behind is Europe plus Israel. It's about 200 people versus 40 people, these two chunks in a normal year. And East Asia is maybe 20 additional people.
What are the numbers like when the conference is in Europe?
In Europe, it was essentially reversed.
That explains part of it, right?
Yeah. So in Europe, yeah, it was like 170 from Europe and half of that from North America, from Europe and Israel, and half of that from North America.
You mean at the France conference?
I'm sorry, the France conference. And it
In
didn't
Paris,
change anything regarding East Asia. The same number, I think 17 or 20 people came. So really, we're talking about the situation mostly in North America and a little bit in Europe and Israel, mostly.
So, I mean, the pent-up demand for doing traveling, there are many options, right? You know, as Shahar said, you know, for senior people, there could be many other things, workshops to attend, these things to attend.
Yeah.
It's not clear that by moving to a non-standard time, while the deadline is in April, people will suddenly say, okay, FOCS is happening. Let's go. I think that, I mean, it's my opinion is that you'll create a lot of uncertainty and it'll actually hurt the conference, I think. It's better to stick to November and say, okay, you know, we'll do our best to hold it in person. If things are good, we do it. Otherwise, we go to virtual and wait out one more year. And that's, I think, guarantees the people who are submitting the paper that they will have the conference in November, virtual or in person, and we can figure out better options for the year after if things don't improve. I don't find it easy to believe that somehow it's not feasible to hold it in November, but people will psychologically feel comfortable in February because somehow then between November and February, the vaccines suddenly.
I think the point is that to make a decision for November, we have a shorter time window. We will probably have to decide by March and April. And what Yuval is saying is that several vaccines are supposed to come into the market around that time. So a couple of months could make a significant difference here. And I mean, that's what we're talking about. If we try to have this way or that way, then I think we will probably have a virtual conference because, you know, we will need to know by March, April, whether we are having a conference in November or not.
Why is that?
Because we'll have to make bookings. People who are traveling internationally will probably need to have some idea. And, you know, we cannot prepare for both, you know, for both virtual and in person for November right now.
No, I agree, but I see even these conferences, for example, right, current FOCS and the next talk, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? And I feel like by July, we would know whether we can hold it in November or not, right? If it's not so great in July, there's no, obviously we cannot hold it, right?
But in July, we can't book a place for November. Right. That's the problem.
Yeah.
We can still book a place maybe for February, but not for November.
I think the idea is to kind of send a survey to the participants and to the broader community sometime in May, June, July to get a better and concrete sense of the situation as to how the participants feel. And unless there is a significant majority which feels that delaying the conference to whatever, January, February, or March will improve their attendance, we will go with the online, online thing. So I think these are the two options we are considering. We are not considering at this point having a physical conference in November. That looks very unlikely unless things will change significantly very rapidly. And that, at least in the US, I don't see, unless there is a transition of the government and all. I mean, we don't see this happening. Nothing is changing here, right? So I think we are really discussing, to phrase Yuval's question a bit more clearly, either we go for a virtual conference in November, or we postpone the decision of making a virtual in November versus a physical in February or January or March to sometime May or June next year. We are not deciding that we're going to have a conference in February right now. We're just postponing the decision making to later.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess we mostly want to understand now how people feel. And I think we sort of got that. Their feelings in different directions. And most people don't feel either way.
Yeah. So we postpone the question then, I guess.
Well, we have to discuss this, and this also has to be discussed in the steering committee. It's an important decision, right? And no matter what we do, I mean, if we do something out of the ordinary, we have to discuss this with the SOTA people.
Mm-hmm.
So does anyone have anything else to add? Because if
maybe
not,
then we can do an experiment to co-locate FOCS and SOTA. It
we
may
can do
actually
that
be
as well.
a good thing, maybe, it's
who is doing SOTA though?
So SOTA basically,
SOTA
temporarily is for next year is scheduled in DC.
How would we collocate them? You mean you move both of them to Denver, or we move both of them to DC, or how would that work?
What I'm saying is, if both are forced to go virtual, because
okay.
you already postponed way back, and then suddenly you all have to go virtual too. Then maybe it's a good experiment to do a bigger virtual conference.
But I mean, the whole point of co-location is to make it easy to travel. I mean, if it's virtual, then there's no travel.
Yeah. So I have actually a personal thing in this. So since 2002, when I was the associate chair of the TCMF, I've tried to get a conference in Denver. Like I tried this for many, many years. And so this is one of these things that as I said, it's not like the organizing committee can do this and then is ready to do it again. So it's just one of these things where this is an area of the country we've never had FOCS or stock before. I mean, actually, the Boulder, since the 1970s, I guess there was a stock in Boulder at that point. So it's just kind of a long-term thing, and I would hate to see us, miss out on our one chance of having the conference there. So anyway, that's.
I mean, hey, I could keep organizing FOCS every year then until we get it right.
It may be nice to just do it when we're all relaxed and move it one more year, right? And do it virtually if things are uncertain, right?
Yeah, but then who does the individual organization? So we'd have to have somebody else step up to do the online organization again.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be in favor of that if we could find, if that could be done separately, so we don't put the local organizers through it again.
Yeah, I think that I support that. I think I support that, right? If we need to run virtual, then we appoint a virtual committee to set it up. So this way, we really spare. Folks already did a lot of work locally. So that's why I feel it would be wonderful to return to Colorado when it's possible, and when we do virtual, we have a new set of people who run virtually.
So,
So
organizing, organizing a virtual conference could be outsourced for money, by the way. So that
right, but just to clarify what you're suggesting, that since I'm the local organizer, I would not organize it 2021, and like it will become like a floater bid. Then whenever we can go, I'm taking the first spot that's allowed. Something like when we can go in person, like that bid will kick in. So like I am off duty for 2021, but on duty for the first available in-person slot. Is that what you're suggesting?
So
that was in my mind. Yeah.
You will notice our next item on the agenda is FOCS 2022, and you will notice that there is an issue like that we are going to vote on.
Okay.
So basically, Demalia is here, but we weren't able to go to Durham this year, so we're going to do it in 2022. With pretty
So
much
then
the
we
same
could
people
do-
organizing it.
Right. So we could do Boulder 2023 and everything shifts by 2 years or something.
Yeah, something like that. But I hope
Okay,
to
that's
be
a
able
lot.
to go to
Yeah.
Denver in 2021 or early 2022 if need be. I suggest we keep discussing this and also engage the community a little bit on these decisions. And I need to check with Chanqua regarding soda about the possibility of moving even the deadline of FOCS. So that might help as well. I suggest we leave the discussion here because time is getting late and the next item requires a vote. So let's vote on FOCS 2022 and get back to 2021 later. Okay? Or Alexandra, do you need more input from?
No, I mean, I just want to know what I'm doing, at some point. That's all.
Yeah, well, the three of us
on top
will
of
have to
things.
discuss this. Yeah, the three of us will have to discuss
If you
this
tell
too.
me what to do, I'll do it,
Okay. Well, you see the attitude that enabled FOCS to be in Denver.
Yeah. I'll do whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, Alexander wasn't there then.
Yeah, I know. An opportunity that only recently materialized. Okay, so I guess Nishit and you and I will discuss this further. Take into account all the stuff that's being said here about trying to have more certainty in life. Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Demalia, there is a bid for 2022. Demalia will present it quickly and then we need to vote on it.
All right, so thanks, Yuval. So it's pretty simple. So we are proposing to hold FOCS 2022 in Durham. So we'll take a year's break and we'll rejig the team a little bit. So people who were really heavily loaded this year will not be a part of the organization team. So it will be, the bid is that it will be organized by Eronga, myself, and Ben Rossman. And I really don't have a lot of information in the slides. I'll quickly run through them because it's 2 years out and in the middle of the pandemic, we really don't know very much. But yeah, so hopefully November 2022 in Durham, in the Research Triangle. So I think it would be in Durham, but it could be somewhere else in the Research Triangle, Raleigh, or somewhere like that. Depends on which place we get. For how long, of course, this is still up for discussion. I just put whatever we have been doing in the last few conferences. Registration would be about the same as recent years. Hotel would probably be a little cheaper. And I have 2 or 3 slides about the research triangle. It's home to 3 major universities, Duke, NC State, and UNC, and has a pretty visible. It's pretty visible in the tech sector in terms of its presence in the tech sector. So there's something called Research Triangle Park, which is really a technology park. It's home to about 1.5 million people, so lots of people, but somewhat spread out over several cities. So this is the venue that we had originally selected for FOCS 2020, the Durham Convention Center. We are hoping we will get the venue again in 2022. And if we do, then things like drawing up a contract and stuff would be easier. So it's in downtown Durham. It's attached to a Marriott. It's walking distance from many hotels, restaurants, etc. And as usual, there's still discussion about what kind of satellite events we can have. Some of them we can even locate on the Duke campus, which is pretty close to the hotel. In terms of reachability, it's about 20 minutes from the airport of the area, the Raleigh-Durham Airport. It has direct flights to basically most US cities, including cities on the West Coast. It's kind of hard to list cities now because a lot of these flights are suspended, but hopefully we'll have those in 2022. And direct international flights from a few locations in Europe and Canada. So basically you can reach pretty much from most places in the world, you can reach Raleigh-Durham with a sort of one hop, at most one hop, or at most 2 hops. A lot of hotels within a half-mile radius. All of these are very easily walkable in less than 10 minutes from the hotel, from the conference venue. And I just quoted some prices that were from before the pandemic. So we hope that the prices will be in a similar range. Lots of things to do in the area. If you want to take a few days off, you can go off to the Outer Banks, which is about 3 to 4 hours off. So we are kind of in the middle of the mountains and the sea, about midway. So you can drive out 3 hours and you will get to the sea on one side and to the mountains on the other side. So you can go to the Blue Ridge Parkway. There are other things like museums and stuff. Durham is known for its food scene. Lots of very good restaurants. And that's all I have. So if you have any questions, I can answer those.
Thank you. Any questions, anyone?
Well, we only have one option, right?
Yeah.
So no questions.
But we need to vote on this option. So I think we'll just take a vote of who objects to this bid. I guess you can use the that face, the open mouth face, if you object to it. You don't have to vote in favor, just against.
Just supporting.
Okay, yeah, you can show support, but I don't see anyone objecting to this bid.
About a general question, there's some thoughts of having one of Stock or FOCS virtual.
I'm sorry?
So there's some thoughts of having either Stock or FOCS go virtual. So this might conflict with the physical conference.
Well, if we make a decision to revise FOCS substantially before 2022, then obviously the decision to do it in Durham will be revoked. But right now, there's no such decision, so we have to proceed according to our current rules. And you know, even if we take a decision to switch to virtual, maybe that won't take effect in 2022. Depends on what will happen in 2021. In particular, at some point, people will really like going to a conference, right? After a few years of pandemic, I'm sure people will want to see each other. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be anyone against it. So the decision has been taken to finally reach Durham in 2022. Some people are really happy, Till in particular, and Thomas. Great. Okay, so we're down to the last order of pre-planned business. Sandy will present part of the issue. Is Samir here? I think Samir Cooler. I guess he's not here. So I'll present Samir's part of the deal, and then Sandy will. Well, actually, I'll present both things because Sandy didn't want to present it, right?
Well,
I can
run down the issues. I just don't have a,
yeah.
I haven't surveyed all the information required, so.
Okay, there are actually two things, but they seem to be somewhat related. The first thing is the issue of anonymous submissions. So this is a fashion that has reached the theory community to have anonymous submissions. And the reason Samir wanted the issue raised here is because Samir is chair of SIGACT that runs STOCK. SIGACT is the special interest group at ACM. We're sponsored by IEEE, so that's the organizational situation. Now, the reason Samir wanted it raised at FOCS is because there is some indication that ACM may force all of its conferences to switch to anonymous submissions, and that may include STOCK. And Samir wanted the theory community to have some sort of unified front regarding the issue. Now, as far as I know, SOTA is running an experiment in anonymous submissions. So sort of the unified front is not there anyway, but I think it's worthwhile to discuss this a little bit here. I just want to mention that there are actually two options on the table, or two options on the table for being discussed. I mean, we're not going to take any decisions today. I just want to hear what people have to say. So the first option is of course complete anonymity. That means that both the PC members and the sub-referees do not know who the authors are, and or at least do not have the name. Let me make it more explicit. They do not. The names of the authors are not on the paper that they're reviewing. They may know it from other sources. That's one of the issues. And the second option is a milder version where the PC members do know, do have the name of the authors available, but the sub-reviewers don't get the names of the authors when they are asked to review a paper. And Chandra said that ITCS had also anonymous submissions. So this is one issue. The other issue that was raised by Sandy yesterday is the issue of PC submissions. We already had a vote in 2017 against PC submissions. So it's been 3 years, so we can discuss it again. We're not going to vote on it this time, but I just want to hear your thoughts. The question is, do we allow PC submissions? And this is somewhat related to anonymous submissions because that's one of the ways to handle PC submissions, is to make the authors anonymous. And then supposedly the PC doesn't have an advantage regarding its own papers. Sandy, do you have stuff to say?
Yeah, the reason I just kind of tossed it out there as something to consider is that that was the #1 reason why someone declined an invitation to serve on the PC. So it is, we ask a lot of committee members. It's not easy to get people willing to participate. It's a heavy load. And so it's sort of one more deterrent. And the biggest one was when it happened at, it's hard to get senior people in particular to serve on the committee. And oftentimes they have a student. And if you have a student who's submitting a paper, then you have to take the needs of your student first. So I understand it's messier, certainly to handle these, but I think it's worth considering. And FOCS is, I think, one of the last holdouts that doesn't allow this. So I think just that is an important consideration. So that's why I put it out there.
So I think SOTA allows this and STOCK allows this nowadays, or at least some years it allows it.
Yeah, I had Edith's slides from STOCK. I've lost track of the years, 2 years ago. And they did allow it, and there was just kind of a higher bar, and they had 4 referees instead of 3, and they made the decisions before the meeting on the PC submission. So it's not, you don't have this awkward thing where someone leaves the room and you're deciding on their paper. So
there was also a vote after last STOCK, the survey that was sent out to everybody who participated in STOCK. And it was in favor of allowing PC submissions. I don't remember exactly by which margin, maybe 60% to 40%. I can send the link.
Given the number of conferences and the load, I mean, I think it's getting very hard for PC chairs to get people. So that seems to be the main driver of this, right? To some extent, PC chairs being unable to get enough people given the number of conferences and increasing the number of submissions. So I don't know. I think I feel like even though I'm a little reluctant on it, the ship has sailed more or less. In most theory conferences have done this.
You ever think of a little different structure? I mean, having 30 PC members in a big room is really kind of hard to manage. You could have like this is what a lot of other CS conferences do, have a multi-tiered committee where only the top tier is not allowed to submit. And then, they have a small executive group and then who makes the final decisions, and then have a secondary PC, people can submit, that are maybe more clustered. That was basically what was done anyway this year.
Yeah, I mean, this solves this issue, but then there's another issue that comes up when you have this multi-tiered system, where people feel that sort of decisions are not made by some representative group of the community, but some small junta. So it's sort of, there's some perception issues there also.
Yeah, this year we implemented the clusters. We had smaller meetings, and so those were very productive to have like smaller groups of 10 people over Zoom discussing a set of related papers, but there was not the hierarchy at all. So everyone was equal, and at the end, it was sort of a full PC decision.
But that's actually a model that could be conductive to PC submissions, because if you have different groups of the PC discussing papers, then a group of PC members could discuss papers of people who are not in that group.
Yeah, but the clusters are sort of by area, right? By nature. So it's highly likely that, you may, if your paper is assigned to a cluster, then you're also reviewing a lot of the other papers. So
that's a disadvantage, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, to some extent, we already had this with hard conflicts. We had this issue.
Yeah, I mean, we're already implementing some version of it with hard conflicts where you don't even see the paper and the review system at all, right?
Yeah.
But what we don't have, I guess, is this, the way they handled it for stock was to actually make decisions before the PC meetings and, have a slightly higher bar for acceptance and 4 instead of 3 referees. And so there's, these safeguards in place, which make it a little clumsier, but
I'm somehow very dubious about these higher bar things, because when you're reviewing the paper, the bar is higher, so you're going to adjust your review to the higher bar.
On that similar note, from the TCC business meeting yesterday, they remarked that they actually decided to do the 4 reviews for all papers, not just the PC submissions, because there was a sense that actually having the extra reviews on the PC member submissions actually made it easier for PC member papers to get in, because it reduces the variance on it makes for a more confident review. Yeah. So it's very hard to predict how how these things play out.
Yeah, but maybe anonymizing the authors would solve this issue. I mean, although almost all papers are online, so people can just go and find the author anyways, but I don't know.
But my concern about anonymous submissions is exactly this. For most papers, it's very easy to not just guess the authors. I mean, that might not be so easy, but to actually verify who are the authors just by searching the title of the paper. Because it's on archive, or someone gave a talk on it, or someone listed it on their webpage, even without a link. So you find many of the authors, but it's not common knowledge in the PC who the authors are if they're anonymous. So in fact, sort of these hidden biases are harder to detect and fix, because normally if someone on the PC is biased against a person, maybe other members in the PC might be aware of it and might notice it and might, take care of negating it. But if they don't know who the authors are and they haven't bothered searching for them, and the person who is biased did bother doing that, this is much harder to detect when you're discussing the paper.
If I may, I would comment on that. I'm more concerned about positive bias than negative bias. The mere fact that you recognize something, is it the institution or the authors themselves, gives you a positive bias. That's just how our brain works. And so even if you can't find out who the authors are, it still helps to fight that bias. So I'm in favor of the anonymous submissions, and I would say the PC members should not know the authors. The PC chair should know to handle the conflicts, but the decision about the papers where the sorting is done and where to make the cut would best be done on the anonymous papers as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point that you're making about positive bias. How do you suggest handling subreferring? What would prevent sending paper to the authors themselves?
The system itself. I think the systems can already do that. They detect if it's the same person and then just say, without disclosing, there's a conflict. And that could be because some other PC member asked the same person already, or because it's the author, or because they declared a conflict explicitly. I don't think that's a big issue. We had that in an ASA track B as an experiment. I think it worked fine. There was no real extra trouble. It's a little inconvenient, but not really much more than that.
Is ASA track A did the same this year?
Okay.
But a question is,
getting it as well.
Yeah.
now, now it's been, many years of conferences and computer science conferences and other fields having different choices about this sort of thing of anonymous versus non-anonymous submissions. Has there been any, you would imagine by now there have been some studies that have tried to get at the questions of bias and the effect on the review process. It would be nice to be informed about that as we try to make a decision about any changes here.
There's definitely evidence for implicit bias in general in both directions, positive and negative. I'm not aware of specifically.
I mean specifically in our context, because there are all these things of, at least I feel quite strongly that we should not set up a system where we tell people not to disseminate their work and not post their papers in archive and not give talks in order to support an anonymous review, because that's kind of slowing down science. For
that's
the
not
wrong
the
reasons.
suggestion.
No, I understand that's not the suggestion, but then a question is how the fact that the information is out there and can be obtained easily, and some people may know it and some people may not. It's not clear how this changes things. I hesitate to take like orchestra editions as the example for how our review process goes, because the context is so different.
There actually was a study in CS. I forget which area, but you do get more broader participation, particularly from women, I think it was, when you had the anonymous submissions. So I think that's true. I have one issue about anonymous submissions, doesn't come up, whether you think this is good or bad, is that when you see a theorem that's an open question, that's been around for, a theorem that's been around as an open question for a while, I think knowing who the authors are is, to me personally, valuable information. If it's someone I know who generally does the theorem correctly, I'm much more likely to trust it than someone I've never heard of, or isn't known to the community. And I think that's legitimate. Maybe people don't think that's legitimate, but there's a big, to me, you throw out useful information when you throw out the author's names. Now, having said that, I love experimentation. This doesn't have to be a permanent thing. So you could try anonymous submissions for a year, see how it goes, and then go from there.
So Soda and Stock are already doing those experiments.
Soda basically started a PC submission one conference ago. Suchi led the whole effort, very thoroughly set up a process, at least to make sure that the PC member are holding at the standard we expect. And we had long discussion, actually quite a heated discussion about the anonymous submission. And there's some kind of generational divide. Clearly, the younger generation are much more supportive of the idea of anonymous submission to ensure more degree of fairness. And in Soda, basically, essentially, after we take a vote, initially we said we'll take just an informational vote, then we'll deliberate. And eventually the steering committee basically framed for a 2-year trial. And so in order to set up a 2-year trial, what we did also is that we appointed the next 2 PC chair. So which means right now, I knew the next 2 PC chair. They know each other, and they were told that they are the person who are going to implement the anonymous submission. So this way, they have a little bit of continuity, and also it's not just one person to try to create the entire system. So it gave some broader look into the situation. So that's basically the best we feel we can do. To the community deserve a trial, and also it's good to have sort of two next leaders agree they will be consistently try this thing, right? So and in 2 years we'll have a report and analysis, and then putting a broad discussion to see whether we will continue.
So one option would be to wait for your experiment, right?
I think each community is slightly different. For example, soda has a slightly different distribution of people to go there, in also part because of the SIAM discrete math connection.
Yeah.
And also that community showed much higher desire for anonymous submission. So somehow the largely clearly is a generation distribution difference, and also I think between so-called traditional CS algorithmic and discrete mathematical structure, there was also a sort of more favorability of an anonymous support submission in the applied math section. Yeah.
So anyone else has strong opinions on, or maybe not so strong, but thoughts to share with us? I'd be happy to hear from more people what they think about both issues, anonymous submissions and PC submissions. No one else. Does anyone know what's going on at Stock? I mean, is there anything going on at Stock regarding anonymous submissions? Guess no one knows that either.
At least this year, it's not anonymous.
It's not anonymous.
Yeah, hi, I'm Virginia. I'm the PC chair of Stock this year. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so we don't have anonymous submissions because I got the impression that there wasn't as much support for that as for PC submissions. For that, we had quite a bit of support, and I firmly believe we should allow it for a variety of reasons that I've outlined in the past, but I can also say a little bit about this too, if you want.
Sure, yes.
So one of my main reasons is because kind of personally for women, it's difficult because we end up being in a lot of program committees, many more than the typical computer scientist. And so it's really a burden on us if we cannot submit and our students cannot submit because of the same reason. And so because of this, it makes it even harder to get women to be on PCs. As you noted, Sandy had a hard time getting PC members, but also, you know, it's just not fair. So because of this, I think it should be allowed. I think we're learning how to deal with the PC submissions. We've had several successful experiments. I believe Shuchi presented a very nice statistics on how it went with Soda. And I'm going to follow her advice this year, and I'll report how it goes afterwards. So.
Okay, sounds good. But what you said so the main reason for not doing anonymous submissions was that you didn't think it had as much support, or were there other reasons as well?
Oh, I don't know. I guess there wasn't very much support, and it definitely not enough to just have another experiment on top of PC submissions. I think a lot of people have reasons against having anonymous submissions. Some of these were outlined, but yeah.
Okay.
I served on the ITCS committee not this time, but last time, and I don't think it was completely blind, but you had to submit a paper without the names on the front. So you could dig and find out the names if you wanted to, but I thought it very useful. I preferred not to know. So my first impressions of the paper were always without seeing the names. And then if I had some reason to know, or I needed to verify something or look for a sub-referee, I could look, but it was better for my first take on the paper to not know. And that's kind of a milder version of it. It's kind of a baby step in that direction if we're sort of hesitant. And I'd just like to echo Virginia's support for the PC submissions, partly because of the gender bias. Women are over-asked to serve on these committees, and I think it does kind of tend to hurt women more that we can't also submit. So.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I wonder, so those of you who had experience in PCs with anonymous submissions, did that affect in any way the bidding on the papers? Salil wanted to say something, so you can go ahead and say.
Just on the same topic of anonymous submissions, I think my feeling is similar to Sandy's, that I've been on PCs where of both kinds, and I do think there is something nice about your first impression of the paper not being the author's names, and less about trying to keep this thing a secret and completely out of the process. And I do think there are times where it actually is informative to the decision process to know the author's names. But I also kind of look forward to reading the links that people shared about studies about the effect of double blind versus not submissions. On the other issue of PC member submissions, what I was going to say before Virginia spoke was that I think whatever can make the PCs work and the PC chairs work easier is a good thing. I think the PCs have an extremely difficult task and are operating under a lot of pressure and time constraints. And so, if dealing with PC member submissions makes the work harder, then maybe that's a reason not to do it. But I think Virginia and Sandy made a very strong argument in favor of allowing it.
Mm-hmm. So Salil, you said you served on committees that had anonymous submissions, and there's an issue I wonder about that is when you bid on papers, you have to bid based on a very superficial impression of what the paper is about, right? I mean, people don't normally read 400 or 600 abstracts. They just bid based on the titles, and maybe if they know the authors, then they can guess what the paper is about. So do you feel that it's a hindrance, or it doesn't matter?
I think this was actually even on my first experience with this was actually even on a non-anonymous PC that was using Shia Levy's conference review software, where even though the papers were submitted non-anonymously, the way the system was set up is that you still have to kind of work to see the author's names, and you can see the title and abstract, which as you said, is the main thing you look at during the bidding process, without seeing the author's names. And I found that sufficient information to bid on papers, and maybe it is a nice thing. And I already skimming the study that David shared in the chat, it seemed, maybe it is problematic that the bidding process already, they found evidence that is so influenced by the author names.
So Thomas has a different view, I guess. Thomas, do you want to speak, or should I read what you wrote?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I think Lance already pointed at this point. Well, on the internet, we all of us know this problem, and being anonymous leads to people writing fake news, and not only not in science, but you know. So if you let people be anonymous, we may generate papers with lazy accuracy from people we don't know. And even if it's a long-standing open question. And so I'm in favor of if you submit something, if you publish something, you have to stand for this and with full responsibility. So this is yes, maybe it's a little bit old-fashioned, but that's my opinion.
So if I get it correctly, you're worried that people will be sloppy because it won't harm their
people in our community. So I see the point with the PC. I agree. This is maybe a solution, but well, it's a trade-off, like always. But if you say, oh, you can, well, FOCS and STOCK are very, very good conferences and very and many people, yes, if they know I have to stand for something which I write, then they are more try to be more accurate, and this is my point. So this is the experience with being anonymous in other fields of our life.
Uh-huh.
So, by the way, here, even in this online conference, some people are here anonymous with names like Thomas iPad or something like that. Or
I would say though, you know, the super low quality papers are usually pretty easy to deal with.
Yeah,
I mean that's not the bulk of the time spent on your committee.
So yeah, I reviewed a lot of anonymous papers for crypto conferences, and usually when you're a reviewer, you know who the authors are because it's in your specific topic. But yeah, I think that maybe for the PC, it might get some, like it might remove some bias. So I think it's a good maybe it's a good thing to try.
Yeah,
I actually like Sandy's suggestion where initially it's anonymous, and if you feel you need to know the authors to help judge your paper, you can go track it down.
So it just doesn't appear on the top of the first paper or something.
Right, you just don't, you submit a PDF of your paper without names. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in there, you know, there's a record, there's a page that has the full author affiliation, but you have to, it's a few clicks away.
Mm-hmm.
But not for the reviewers, right? Just for the PC.
Oh, you mean for all? I was suggesting this for all submissions. So, is that what you're asking, Alex?
No, who would have access to it?
The even PC, you know, PC? My experience with ITCS was that the PC did have access to it, but you had to kind of go out of your way to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was at least, you know, a step in that direction. And for me, it was useful. So my first read of every paper was without knowing who wrote it.
That's, I guess, a compromise between the two approaches.
To a certain degree, that's what you...
Most of the reservations against... I guess Sebastian is complaining about the term anonymous. You prefer double blind. Yeah, okay. Just nowadays, when vaccines are tested in double blind tests, I find double blind also a misnomer. Right? We're not giving PC members a real paper or a placebo. without them knowing. So, okay, any other thoughts? I mean, I found the discussion so far very useful because there are all sorts of considerations I didn't even think about. So if anyone else has to say anything about this, now's the time.
Well, maybe just if there's no very strong reason against it, I would be in favor of trying it. Well, reasons against could be it creates a lot of work. I don't think that's true, but it depends on the submission system.
It will more or less dictate a submission system that makes this relatively easy, right? But you're saying I mean, if I understand your line of thinking, you're saying, okay, let's try it. But then how do we judge the experiment?
I'm not suggesting an experiment. I think it's clear cut that there's not much to be lost, potentially a lot to be gained from removing that bias. So just go ahead and do it.
Uh-huh.
Apparently the experiments have been done. I haven't looked at the study yet, but.
Okay, good. So as I said, we're not making any decisions today. I think I'll go back to the steering committee with all the stuff that's being said here, and we will discuss this and we will see how to proceed. And I guess we're not going to proceed without consulting the community again. So even if we decide to do this, let's say for 2021, it will be a one-time shot, and we will have to vote on it in 2021. So does anyone have any other business for us to discuss? If not, we're adjourned. Oh, I see. Salil says removing information can sometimes increase bias. And he gave a link. To a paper.
Oh, this is just the fairness through awareness work, which is in the kind of algorithmic fairness literature.
Yeah,
so paper from our community, which has some nice examples. So it's not, in general, it's not always the case that removing, some attribute reduces bias even related to that attribute. And so that's why I think it's very context dependent and one that we should think about carefully and look at examples that are close to our community and think about whether to what extent they apply or don't apply.
In my mind, the question is mostly empirical. I mean, if we can come up with empirical evidence that this is better or worse for conferences such as FOCS, similar to FOCS. I mean, stock is similar to FOCS. SOTA maybe is a little bit different, but not very different. There are ESA is double blind. I don't remember if ICALP is. So there are these conferences that we might be able to learn from. But there's no, I mean, how do you actually measure these things empirically?
Just read through the Wisdom 2017 experiment. Quite convincing numbers about at least some metrics that were affected by double-blind reviewing versus single-blind reviewing.
In what community, though?
Admittedly, not the theory community. Okay. Theoreticians can try and run experiments as well.
Yeah, I guess. No, I just wonder, maybe different research communities could be very different. But maybe not. I don't know. I mean, we all like to think we're exceptional, right?
Yeah, Martin's not here to say that an excuse like theory community is special is not a reasonable excuse.
Yeah, that's what I'm waiting for.
Looks like no.
Yeah. Okay, so as I asked, does anyone have any other business we should be discussing? If not, I think it's time to adjourn this meeting. So thank you everyone for participating. For me, it was instructive, the whole discussion on all matters. See you tomorrow.